Front Mission is a mech-based strategy RPG series that debuted in Japan in 1995 on the Super Famicom that wouldn't see a release in the West until 2000 with Front Mission 3 on PS1. The first game in the series, meanwhile, saw a port to the WonderSwan Color, a quote-unquote remake for the PS1 title Front Mission First, a port of that remake for the DS, and then in 2022 we have a remake exclusive to the Nintendo Switch. What sets the first Front Mission apart from other games in the genre is some notorious difficulty due to wild RNG, which is retained in every version of the game, and no permadeath. So despite the difficulty, it isn't as punishing as it could be, and that difficulty does let up after the beginning, especially when you start to unlock skills. Huge thank you out the gate to GameFAQs user Lagaya Rules, because there isn't as much documentation on these games that take so long to come to the West, and they've been on top of this info since 2007, and they're a project manager on a handful of fan translation projects for the series. Now, if you wanted to play the Super Famicom version of Front Mission, there is an English patch available. The English patch is a little unpolished here and there, and it doesn't flow as well as it possibly could. It's also got a few instances of untranslated dialogue. That's being critical of it though, otherwise it gets the job done, and it's still a perfectly fine way to play this version on a Super Nintendo. With no localization officially to speak of, we can move on to the WonderSwan Color version. In the WonderSwan version, you could directly exchange vehicle data with a friend so that you can fight their units via a link cable. Passwords are still provided though if you want to exchange units in the same way you would on the Super Famicom. There were a handful of gameplay changes introduced in the WonderSwan Color version. Pee-wee doesn't get Speed 3 anymore, bonus XP is now cumulative if you gain multiple levels, and special enemy units such as mobile units, supply trucks, and more reward you with bonus XP, and getting bonus XP from these units isn't seen in any other version either. You can also now skip battle scenes to speed up gameplay. The game's been adapted to the WonderSwan Color's smaller screen size and limited hardware. Because the WonderSwan Color can't really do transparency, you have to move or attack on a black map. UI is consolidated and reorganized, and ultimately, you can navigate menus faster than on Super Famicom. And of course, the music and sound effects are different too to accommodate the different hardware. Next up is the PlayStation 1 version, which, just like the WonderSwan Color version, there is no fan translation for it. The game will ask if you've played the original Front Mission, and if you say yes, you'll immediately be presented with choosing between the OSU campaign and a brand new campaign from the perspective of the USN. The USN campaign also introduces two characters that were later introduced in Front Mission 4 on the PS2. The USN campaign also has exclusive units and weapons including 2 Panzers, 1 part, 5 weapons, though 1 you can't use yourself, and 3 mobile weapons. A handful of OCU missions had slight balancing tweaks. Some examples are that the commission bonus of Mission 4 went from 2,000 to 4,000 to 4,000 to 7,000. The final boss was also nerfed in that its machine gun can't attack up to 3 times in the same phase anymore. The geo effect of some types of terrain such as jungles were tweaked as well. Additionally, Alder now learns a second melee skill. You can still skip battle animations as well, and more info is excised to make skipping even faster. The visuals were overhauled thanks to not having the Super Famicom's palette and hardware limitations. Battlefields were redrawn, sprites were revamped, and more effects and effect details were added. This also includes things like weather and where some battles now have rain or harsh sunlight. Performance-wise, the PS1 version can lag in combat a little bit more than the Super Famicom version would. Load times for each individual engagement are longer too. And now we have Front Mission First for the DS, which is the first time that the first Front Mission game is available in the West, and therefore it's just called Front Mission. Now before the DS was released, the game's producer Koichiro Sakamoto stated in an interview at E3 that some scenes were a bit too grotesque in the original and they have been toned down a bit. This also follows other claims that the official localization of the DS version is censored and toned down like some other Front Mission titles. After comparing practically every cutscene between the fan translation and the official DS translation, it really isn't that toned down. It's not a 4-kid situation where it skirts around the grotesque stuff and drops important plot info. There are some dark plot points, and these points have an effect on Royd no matter which version you play. If you were to play the DS version and then discuss plot details with someone that only played the Super Famicom version, you will be talking about the same plot points and the same effects on characters. Otherwise, there's still new dialogue and even some new scenes in this version's OCU campaign, including a flashback during Mission 11. So moving on from the story, you're no longer asked if you've played Front Mission before and instead are provided an optional tutorial. In the Japanese version though, you are still asked if you played the game before, and the tutorial only occurs in the OCU campaign, and subsequently the money and XP from it carries over, unlike in the North American version of the tutorial. You can wirelessly exchange unit data with a friend now, and this time the passwords on units were removed since it's not necessary anymore for multiplayer. This also means that special units can't be accessed in dual mode anymore though. In addition to the PS1's USN, or as it's now called the UCS campaign, the DS version adds 9 secret missions, 4 for OCU and 5 for UCS, that reward you with access to some mobile weapon boss units and Wanzers. The DS version also adds some previously inaccessible as well as new weapons and parts coming from other Front Mission games. Additionally, some other weapon designs were updated to how they appear in later titles. There's also various new cameos from characters throughout the Front Mission series. New Game Plus was also added. Upon beating the game, you unlock some difficulty options and sound test. Upon further playthrough completions, you unlock even more difficulty options. Balance-wise, outside of the new weapons and now playable mobile weapons, a few things were adjusted. Requirements for skills were altered a bit in the OCU campaign. For example, for Keith, Double requires a certain amount of melee XP now, instead of pilot level, and Ralph has a 3rd skill slot now and can learn Guide. And enemies can actually use items now, such as acid bombs, chaff grenades, flash grenades, and smoke grenades. You can't skip battles anymore, but you can at least speed up combat with an option or by holding a button. Also, when you earn new shop supplies, they will stay in every shop, so you don't have to backtrack to specific shops for older parts. The DS version is otherwise visually identical to the PS1 sprites and UI. Of course though, this version utilizes the dual screen to divvy up the UI, with more info on the top screen and the action on the bottom screen. The soundtrack is once again different from the prior versions, as are sound effects. The music was remixed by Hidenori Iwasaki, who had composed music for recent Front Mission games of the era. And now we come to Front Mission First for Nintendo Switch. Now Square Enix didn't actually play a part in this remake. It's developed and published by Polish studio Forever Entertainment. I got in contact with them and was provided a review code and got to shoot them a few questions in which I can confirm the gameplay balance is identical to the DS version, and thus it's so faithful that you can follow a DS guide just fine. Now the largest change to this remake is the gameplay mode options, Modern Mode and Classic Mode. In Classic Mode, you have an orthogonal camera view, no camera rotating or zooming, the DS OST, and Wanzers will walk instead of dash, but you do have an option to increase movement speed. Note that this walking is slower than the board piece bobbing of the prior versions. In Modern Mode, you have a perspective camera you can rotate almost 360 degrees and zoom in, and an option for either the DS or a reorchestrated soundtrack. There's also an option to hide terrain and Wanzer details with ZL, an option to toggle health bars, bars with ZR, and access to a new tactical map. The tactical map view gives you an efficient overview of the battlefield and lets you conveniently analyze enemy movement and their weapon range. Additionally, you dash instead of walk as you'd expect from the other 3D front mission titles. And regardless of gameplay mode, you can still set instant battles, instant movement, and increase battle speed. Additionally, 3 total difficulty options are present to you right from the start now. You don't need to get to New Game Plus to unlock the first ones. You can change difficulty mode and gameplay modes between missions. You can skip dialogue by holding B, loading battle scenes is significantly faster, and autosaves have been implemented. On the flip side though, there's no unit passwords anymore and no way to share units, so you can't duel your friends' units anymore. Now, the demand for that kind of thing is pretty questionable, but yeah, it is something missing from the prior versions. The visuals have been rebuilt from the ground up in 3D, from the monsters to the environments to menu backgrounds. The environments of levels are one-to-one, and this includes retaining the staircase elevation aesthetic. There's also a diorama aesthetic with the depth of field blur, but you can turn off that blur if you want. With the different perspective options in this version, I've included comparisons between those here as well. Portraits, meanwhile, appear as higher resolution and painted over or filtered, and ultimately retain the Amano nature of the designs. The UI has been totally reworked. While it retains almost the same organization, it now has this more modern sci-fi design, as opposed to the prior 90s military computer aesthetic. Resolution-wise, it seems that the game runs at 864p while docked and 720p undocked, with a pretty stable 30 FPS, though a few missions like Secret Mission 3 or Mission 24 have less stable frame rates in fights. It's something to mention, but it's not much to write home about. This remake offers a reorchestrated soundtrack. So this video had about a minute of major bug issues to show, but they were patched just the other day. There's still going to be a handful of less consistent bugs, but Forever Entertainment is collecting feedback not just on bug reports, but on general quality of life feedback, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw substantial updates down the road. As of right now, their goal has been a faithful recreation with restraint on changes in certain fields and trying to just polish that, though I believe we'll see a few quality of life features implemented over time. The one change I'd like to see is dashing in classic mode because I really prefer the orthogonal camera, and I don't think the walking has any place in the game when it's slower than every prior version. Additionally, Forever Entertainment is not developing the Front Mission 2 and 3 remakes, which is why if you see gameplay so far, they look so drastically different. Otherwise, for English speakers, the DS version hits a lot of bullet points that the other versions lack. If you're planning to continue exploring the series too, you'll also enjoy the cameos present within the DS or PS1 versions. The WonderSwan skipping battles option was a pretty good idea, fitting the system, and of course, there's the original Super Famicom experience with its fan translation, which we always appreciate helping to expose the series to more folks. As always, don't just judge it by what I've said, but also by what you see. And that'll wrap up this video, so feel free to share your thoughts below, leave a like, and if you want to support the channel, you can find me on Patreon. We'll be tackling Crisis Core Reunion next, hopefully before the end of the year, so look forward to that, and until next time, thank you for watching.